Welcome to the Accomplished Brain podcast, where we share our passion, knowledge, and experience about the brain and health.
I want to talk about a couple of things. So there's two things that I want to talk about. I want to bring up another. I want to bring up this article that I read. So I want to bring up 3 points. So one point was using the eyes. The other is using head postures. Right? Okay. Now this isn't. If he's out there, I'm gonna say to him. I'm going to say I'm promoting his work. I want to get in touch with him. So actually, when I cut this video, I might share that I did a podcast, and this guy is really sharp, and if he's out there, I've left him a couple. I want to share my software, and I want to connect with him because he's a really sharp guy. Actually, I don't know all the people written in this article, but I know of 2 of them. I don't know any of them directly. I've not met them. I want to meet 2 of them. Okay. And there's 2 of them. This is an incredible article and I want to share this with you of how I looked at this article from a mechanism and how I started to look at head postures. This is like I right now I'm going through the roof. Like Jeff has to come over to my place and calm me down, give me some magnesium,
Right.
So this is one of the gold standard clinical pearls on clinical pearl articles. This is done, and there's 4 people in this article, and 2 of them I'm going to mention that are just unbelievable. And I don't know of the other 2, but 2 of them I know of. I don't know them personally, and I want to meet them. Dr. Sheikh A.G. Asif Sheikh, his name is. He's originally, I think, from India. Super smart guy who's a neurologist. He's done his fellowship. He did a fellowship at Johns Hopkins, and that's where he met Dr. David Z. Dr. David Z is at Johns Hopkins, a neurologist, and maybe the best in the world in eye movements and vestibular brain function and balance. He's got a gold standard book, Dr. Z, with Dr. Lee, called Neurology of Eye Movements. And I'll share with. I've studied that book for 7 going on 8 years. By far the hardest book I've ever read, by far my favorite book, and just incredible insight. I mean, the amount of research and it was put into that book was just incredible. And Dr. Sheikh A.G. or Asif Sheikh, he's out of Cleveland, and he did a fellowship, and now at Johns Hopkins, and he does a lot of collaboration articles with Dr. Z. I don't know them personally. I know of them. I have a lot of their research articles, and I want to meet both of them. I want to share what we're doing with the software, but incredible guys. So they wrote this article along with Douglas Crawford and Haida Jinnah, and I don't know them either, but they did obviously a part of this article, which is incredible. It's called Cervical Dystonia and Neurointegrated Disorder. What dystonia is there's a sublayer of the brain, and that sublayer gets affected, and it causes the brain to not know where it is in space, and it causes the brain to contract the certain muscles. Okay, so the basal ganglia has 2 pathways that influence cognitive movement, cognition, eye movement, the emotional brain, the limbic system, and the motor movements. And one pathway influences to excite those pathways, those direct pathways, and another part of the pathway is relaxes. So they have to fire at the same rate, and they don't. So what happens, you tend to get stuck in dystonia where your muscles are stuck. And in this case, it's cervical. So you get certain kind of cervical patterns, and you get certain kind of cervical postures. So if you look down here in this article, I want to just show you this. Here's the article that looks at the head when certain areas of the brain are being activated. And what happens is usually it causes a head tilt and a rotation the opposite way, or sometimes the same way. And what will happen is three things. So they'll have a head tilt, they'll have a rotation. Okay, so they'll rotate left or right. They'll be head tilted one direction, and their eye has a skew deviation, which means that one eye is higher and lower. Based on this article, I took this article, the mechanism of what areas of the brain were being activated, which again, this is one of my favorite, this is one of my favorite articles. And these guys, Dr. Sheikh J and Dr. David Z are just, incredible, really bright guys. I took this article and I started to adapt looking at every client and looking at their head posture and then identifying based on this article what part of the brain is being activated that puts them in this position to understand what side needs to be activated, and then a strategy using eye movements or head movements to correct that posture. And amazingly, I've been able to correct so many people's posture without them doing any adjustments or anything other than moving their head, doing vestibular, and using their eye movements. And very specific based on this article. Again, I took the mechanism of these head postures based on this article, and I apply that to almost every client looking at the part of the brain that's being affected. And then I applied eye movements and head movements very specifically based on this article where the problem in the brain was. And amazingly, very simple things have been able to correct their head posture. I mean,
Right.
that's a mechanism-based therapy. Now, he took this article that was actually researched, and I started to add my own layers into that, my own logic to say, well, if he's doing this with dystonia, why don't we just look at that's the mechanism. He's looking at that at that deep level, right? The physiology. And then I just said, let's connect the dots and then let's expand on it and give them simple eye movements, simple head movements, and we could correct postures. And that's why so grateful for these guys and the work that they have done and this article. Just amazing stuff.
Right. Because the pathology doesn't change. If
it's
dystonia, if those muscles are going to be contracted in a certain way, it's going to create the certain, head tilt, rotation, so on and so forth. And what's the difference with somebody who doesn't have dystonia, but they have no awareness, right? Or they have constant tension on one side. There's no difference. You use the pathology and you apply it.
There you go. And here's the thing. And when these guys talked, when Sheikh AG and Dr. Z and the other two people talked about this, wrote this article, it was based on pathology that they've seen. But I just took that and said, well, what happens if they're seeing it in there? Yes, there's a deeper level of what's causing them to be stuck in that. But the reality is, if they're stuck in that posture, logically, the same area of the brain is being affected. Maybe in dystonia, they have another layer that you have to look at and activating that, doing strategies to do that other layer. But the fact of if they're in that posture, there's certain things that are activating the brain. Maybe in this article, the level of pathology is higher, but you could look at everyone then who you can look at everyone's head posture and take those concepts and be able to use then an eye movement or head movement strategy to correct the head posture. And that's what I did. That's a mechanism-based therapy.
For sure.
And his stuff was evidence based on their stuff was evidence based on the dystonia. And I just took that and said, let's apply that to everyone's posture. Now, is that the case all the time? There could be other things too, structurally, that could put them in certain postures. But I would say a lot of times, neurologically, if you look at that, you could do a lot of correct and help a lot of people.
Right. So it's funny because I just want to relate that real quick to the orthopedic world. I mean, if somebody comes in and they say, Jeff, I have pain in the back of my knee, right? You could say, well, it could potentially be ACL, could be meniscus, so on and so forth, right? And you look at it and you have to ask the questions and you have to take a look, like, what's the quality of the tissue, right? So we know that at the end of the day that the popliteus in the back of the knee has fascial attachment to the meniscus. So if it's tight or if it's not moving well, it's going to pull in the dorsal horn of the meniscus. We know that same thing with the semimembranosus. It has a fascial attachment, right? And so from a mechanism based, right, we know that actually maybe we can release those things, we can mobilize them, right, that it's going to take pressure off of that posterior horn of the meniscus. We know that from a lateral standpoint, that potentially the IT band is just extremely dense and that person's not transferring force very well when they walk. Or from their cuboid, right, cuboid transverses force in the foot, and that could be transferring all the way up the chain. And so in a lot of ways, those are all direct or indirect connections, no different than the pathologies that we're looking at here from neuroscience. Then we say, okay, if we do this, do we get a positive response from it? Right.
Yeah, and that's what that's exactly the thought process is.
Right.
You know the physiology, and then you connect the dots and you just say, hey, if I try this logically, do I get a response? And then when you start seeing, you get 1, you get 2, you get 3, and I have a lot of, again, I'm not, and I want to say this, I think the best is getting evidence-based, but again, it takes time to get something like that researched and studied. And that's something that, I'm probably going to be working on with some scientists. And I have all these ideas and I have all this stuff. Can we check this to see if that works, to get to go from being a mechanism to an evidence? I think when it gets to, evidence based, it's great because you have an article that was actually researched.
Sure.
But a lot of times the evidence comes out of a hypothesis, which comes out of, a mechanism, which comes out of you just reading and connecting the dots. So sometimes, that's what I said, a lot of things I'm doing probably maybe in the next 5 years will be, I'm hoping to get, becoming more evidence-based. But I don't just look at the evidence. I look a lot of times at the mechanism, and then obviously I correlate to see, is there any evidence? And if sometimes there's not, it still doesn't stop me from trying those things and seeing if we can get a response.
Right.
So,
and I do think, Andrew, that all comes back to being a good practitioner. And that's whether you're a chiropractor, a physical therapist, you're a neurologist, right? You have to take those things because it's honestly, at the end of the day, it's somebody else's research or study, right?
right.
Whether it's through, dissecting a body to figure out fascial systems, whether that's, magnetic tracing through brain waves, right? It's somebody else's work, but how good are you at applying it? And I think that's one of the things that you've been so great at is like, well, I've done my work to definitely ensure I know the pathologies, and now I know how to apply it and at what rate in order to solicit a good response.
Exactly.